Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Oakville Town Hall, and to those of you who are not from Oakville, welcome to our community. You're most welcome here. My name is Jeff Knoll. I'm a councillor here in the town of Oakville in the region of Halton, and it's my great pleasure to co-host tonight's information session with Lifeline Syria. And we're very, very pleased that we've had such a great turnout and so much interest in helping out with this international crisis. A couple quick things I wanted to mention to you is that this wouldn't be possible this evening without the support of my council colleagues who have obviously agreed to allow us to use these facilities at no charge, so there's no fundraising money going into the use of these facilities. And a couple of my colleagues with me here tonight, Councillor Mark Grant, who's up there with the iPhone taking pictures, and Councillor Ellen Elgar is back there somewhere from Ward 4. He's also joining us tonight. There's a great deal of interest both on town council and regional council, and I've got to tell you that the amount of support that my colleagues have offered in terms of the various facilities that we have at our disposal, both physical facilities as well as social service facilities, has been overwhelming, and I'm very grateful for that. His Worship, Rob Burton, our mayor, was not able to be with us tonight. He had a prior engagement. He attempted to change that, but unfortunately the business of the town had to be dealt with. But he has sent a message, and I just want to read that to you tonight because he's a big supporter of what we are trying to accomplish here in our community. So he says, "Good evening. I want to thank you for attending this information session organized by Councillor Jeff Knoll and Lifeline Syria. It takes a certain kind of person to think about helping those in need, someone who is kind and caring and has compassion for others. All of you here tonight encompass these characteristics and more. Your interest in helping the crisis in Syria by sponsoring a Syrian refugee is inspiring. In Oakville, we are very fortunate. Many of us are financially privileged and able to enjoy more than just the necessities of life. That is why it is so wonderful to see this community come together time and time again to help those who are struggling with hardships. It is proof of the mindset that is coupled to our town's livability, and it truly reflects former Harry Barrett's notion that Oakville is a city that calls itself a town and feels like a village. On behalf of Oakville Town Council, I'd like to thank you again for attending. It feels good to do good, and so tonight we are aiming to provide you with all the information needed to make it easier for you to sponsor a Syrian family in need." And again, that's signed by His Worship, Mayor Burton. Now, I'm not going to make a political speech tonight. I'm going to get off the stage and I'm going to introduce you to our presenter tonight, Alexandra, who is going to walk us through the presentation. But I just want to say a couple quick things. First of all, as the mayor alluded in his letter, this is a community with lots of money in it, but more than the money, we have some really great people with a lot of goodwill. And I think that a community as privileged as Oakville really can step up to help in a time of need, and this is certainly a time of need. So if you're from Oakville, or if you're from other places, we really need your help to make a difference in the world, and we are certainly in a position to do that. Now, one of the things that I've been working on is to try to find ways to make it easier for groups to sponsor here in Oakville, because in addition to the man hours that are required and the initiative, it's a lot of money. It's quite a bit of money to actually sponsor a family. I believe it's around $30,000 for a family of 4 roughly, and you need to make that commitment, and you'll hear more about that tonight. So one of the things that we've done, and it was just approved this morning, is that the Oakville Community Foundation, which is a wonderful nonprofit organization in town that manages the funds of several individuals and organizations in town, has set up the Oakville Resettlement Fund. I should remember that I named it. And this fund has been set up and it's active right now, and there's a piece of paper which gives you details on that fund on the back table, and it will collect money which can then be distributed to groups or neighborhoods or whomever is actually doing the sponsoring. The benefit of working through OCF is that there's a tax receipt, obviously, to those who donate, but more importantly, there's accountability, transparency, and an audit at the end of the day. So it gives people that comfort level that the money is going to where it's supposed to be going, and that it is predominantly, or the vast majority, is going to the actual relief need as opposed to administration. So I encourage you, if you are setting up your own group, or if you simply want to contribute, to consider using the OCF. If you are a group and you're organizing a group, then I encourage you to see Wendy. Wendy, where are you? And Caroline. They're both here from OCF. and you can talk to myself as well. They'll be around throughout the evening, and you can talk to them about how you can interact with them or simply make a contribution to the fund that others can use. The last thing I want to say about the fund is that it is not earmarked for any specific group right now. It is open and accessible to all groups that are interested in sponsorship. So whether you are a church, a neighborhood association, a group of friends, a business, whomever wants to get involved in the sponsorship, we can leverage the Oakville Community Foundation's local credibility and financial prowess to be able to do that. Now, I just want to state that there are a number of initiatives already in play, and some of you may be already aware of those here in town. The interfaith community is working hard on raising money. They have a fundraiser coming up. Recently, a local group of neighbors put together an Indiegogo campaign. Are you here, by the way, from that group? Oh, of course, I just met you a couple seconds ago. My short-term memory loss. And they're out there raising money through Indiegogo. So there's lots of interesting and fun initiatives happening in order to actually move these respective sponsorships forward. So I think I've covered everything I wanted to cover, except I'll say once again, thank you so much for being here tonight. We're very pleased to be able to help as the town, as individual councillors. And I really encourage you to talk to the OCF folks, talk to myself about that process as well. And Alexandra, without further ado, I want to hand it over to you and your presentation. And thank you for coming to Oakville, by the way.
No problem, happy to come.
I'm going to grab that and that.
So, yeah. Okay, we're gonna play test 1, 2, 3. Is that what we're gonna do? 1, 2, we're good? Okay. I've spoken into a lot of mics recently, so I know the drill. So, good evening, everyone. I'm so pleased to be here. First trip to Oakville. So, wonderful location. I have to say, you know, maybe we don't put this on our actual feed, but you might be winning over the Toronto City Hall. I'm not sure. It's kind of prettier here. You've got inside trees and all that. So anyway, I'm Alexandra Kotick. I used to be able to say I was the only staff person of Lifeline Syria, but as of Monday, we had a volunteer coordinator hired. So I'm now there's 2 staff people at Lifeline Syria. So if you have emailed us or you've tried to call us and we haven't been as responsive, I apologize, but we had 1,400 unread emails in 48 hours when the picture broke. So we're just trying to develop community meetings like this so that we can explain sponsorship and help people get moving forward. So just a little quick about me. I used to work for the Anglican United Churches doing their sponsorship program. I've been in the field helping with sponsorship for about 9 years. I have done training overseas. My work, somebody recently said, so I guess your whole career has been in refugee work? And I said, yeah, I guess that's true. So that's what I know, and I'm learning a lot about other practices while we're working on this project. So there'll be time for questions afterwards if I don't cover something you wanted to learn in the presentation. We don't have a mic, but I'll ask people to come to the front when I'm done for questions, try and answer them as best we can. But I'm going to go through the presentation first, and I'll ask for questions at the end. So, just a quick overview of Lifeline Syria so you can kind of get an understanding of who's involved in this whole process. So Lifeline Syria, just because I typed it first, not because it's most important, is up there at the top. Obviously the refugees are involved in this, the sponsor groups, the government at all levels, and settlement agencies. So these are sort of the major players that are involved in private sponsorship. What is Lifeline Syria? How it began is an interesting story, actually. I don't know if people in the crowd remember Operation Lifeline, so the Indo-Chinese or boat people crisis, end of 1970s, 1980s. The people were fleeing mostly Vietnam. They were in boats, which is why they were called the boat people at the time. And it was sort of the first crisis that Canadians went like, well, hang on, how can we help these people? And at that point, private sponsorship started. And we're the only country currently that has private sponsorship, which is really a testament for how welcoming and wonderful Canadians are, that we've managed to keep the program going for this long. We won an award in '86 from the UN, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, for the work that Canada did. It's a good year, '86. I was born that year, so good year. We have some great history of this. And so there was a group of citizens in December who came together and said, you know, we know about what happened with the Indo-Chinese crisis. That was a major problem. What's happening in Syria now? Why is nobody paying attention? Or it's small groups that are trying to pay attention. There hasn't been any big movement. Can we do something about that? So they started talking, they formed a committee, they got working on what we could do, what our goals would be, and in June we launched of this year, so we're a bit of a baby still, and so we've been working diligently to try and develop processes and help people sponsor. Then of course the photo came out at the beginning of the month and it really revved things up. So when we began, we launched with the goal of bringing 1,000 Syrian refugees to the Greater Toronto Area over the next 2 years. And I've been joking with people recently, I think we might do that by December at the point we're going to, because there are so many refugees in need. There's so many wonderful people like you who are stepping forward. We aren't stopping with the 1,000th person. We will keep sponsoring, but that was our goal at that time. What we will do is we'll be a matchmaking service in a sense. I like to say facilitation, but everyone keeps defaulting to matchmaking service, so we're a matchmaking service. We'll be getting all the groups together who need to be involved. So whether it's the sponsorship agreement holders who can submit the cases easily, or working with you on a group of 5, because the Government of Canada on Saturday did relax some of the rules for community groups and groups of 5 sponsorship. The cases that we have from Syrian Canadians who are family and friends of Syrians overseas that have come forward saying, can you help us sponsor the family, or from direct referrals from the UNHCR that come to the Government of Canada that we also have, which are higher needs cases sometimes, but are also available for groups. So we'll be matching all the groups, all the cases, all the sponsors together. And we'll mostly be working with individuals like you, some corporations that are choosing to sponsor, sponsorship agreement holders, settlement agencies, the government, as many partners as we can gather around the table to make sure that these people are received and properly supported when they get here. So, just quickly, this is not the whole definition, but a portion of the definition from the UNHCR, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, on who is a refugee. And it also is used by our government, the Canadian government, to define a refugee. We have a subcategory which is more generalized, but usually this is the definition that most people are accepted on for being refugees. So the part to look at specifically in this is first, a little bit down under the bolded part, they have to be outside of their country of nationality. So Syrians are not refugees while they're still in Syria. They're internally displaced people. You have to have crossed the international border of your country in order to be defined as a refugee under Canadian or international law. And usually the reason that they flee is based on one of the 5 bolded categories of persecution: race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group, or political opinion. So just to clarify what membership in a particular social group is, because that's the one that isn't as obvious, a lot of times these are females. If they're in a country where there's no protection because you're female and you're alone, that could mean that you're part of a particular social group that needs protection. Also, the gay, lesbian, transgendered, bisexual community, LGBT community tends to be very persecuted. So those are examples of groups that are persecuted under that category. And so they're unable to go home. That's the last part of this. They're unwilling or unable to avail themselves of the protection of their country. So right now, obviously, Syria is in a civil war. So they're not able to go home, they're not allowed to be protected. They usually cannot stay in the country they're currently living in, and so that means that they need to seek another option. So a lot of people, as you would have seen, which is the reason that we had that horrible photo come out, are trying to flee to Europe because at least there's some protection in Europe. But obviously Europe can't handle everyone coming, and part of the reason they're fleeing is they see no other hope for them to be resettled in the countries they're currently staying in, which tend to be Turkey, Lebanon, and Jordan as the bordering countries. So that's part of the reason that private sponsorship and resettlement in general from countries is such an important piece of protection, because it allows people who are very vulnerable and very in need to be resettled to another country so they don't have to seek those desperate solutions like getting on a raft and potentially dying in the Mediterranean. So in Canada, once somebody is interviewed by a Canadian visa office overseas and passes the definition of a refugee, they also go through a few extra screenings. They must also pass the security and criminality screening. So security is something that's big, broad. So they look at the Interpol, they look through CSIS, they check to see if anyone's been part of a terrorist group or if they've been supportive of a major regime that Canadian government would not consider to be acceptable under their requirements. And then they look at criminality. Have they committed any major crimes? The caveat to that is if your major crime is the reason for your persecution, like a lot of people ended up in jail because of their political protest, that obviously is the reason why you're being persecuted. It is not necessarily you committing a major crime. So there's certain things that people do that wouldn't count, but generally, if there's been a major crime committed, they would not be admissible to come to Canada. They also go through a basic medical screening, which usually screens out things that are communicable. Oh, good, I said it. Usually at the end of the day, I can't say that word. So it's usually just things like, for instance, in East Africa, a lot of people have tuberculosis or malaria, so things that maybe are a danger if they are traveling, and things that need to be treated right away before they can travel, but it doesn't usually screen them out from arriving in Canada. Some refugees have lost limbs or have other medical needs that need to be treated, and usually if there is treatment available in the country they're going to, and that's part of the reason they need to be resettled, that is an acceptable reason and they pass their medical screening. So on arrival, the refugees become permanent residents. So they have access to the same things that any other permanent resident has access to. They also have to follow the same rules and responsibilities as another permanent resident on their way to hopefully becoming citizens. But that does mean that they can't access social assistance under this program. So the goal of this program for private sponsorship is that you are their support for the year. They do not access social assistance during that year. So private sponsorship just generally is the resettlement of a refugee to Canada. So they've left their country, they're in another country, they can't stay there, so they resettle to a third country. And the financial costs and support, settlement support, is provided by groups or organizations. So the government sponsors their refugees, we sponsor the refugees privately, and over the years, actually, Canada's private program has been one of the 4th largest in the world to bring refugees in, so it's quite a strong program. The sponsoring groups must provide financial support or settlement assistance, and settlement assistance for 12 months or until the refugee becomes self-sufficient. Everyone always asks me about this one. So it has to be 12 months. If they are able to find a job and start working within that 12 months and support themselves, you can slowly reduce based on if they're able to support themselves at a reasonable amount, the amount of money you have to give. Likely you cannot reduce the amount of settlement support you have to give, but over time they will require less input from you as the sponsors. But if they lose that income within the 12 months, you have to start supporting them again. Your commitment is no longer than 12 months at any point, though. So the maximum you're required to support them for is the 12 months. It may be less if they're able to be connected to support services or if they're able to start working. A lot of Syrians have post-secondary education. They're very entrepreneurial. It's one of the groups that I've seen that has actually settled quite well. And I know there's a strong Syrian community here in Oakville. There is also in Toronto that are helping people connect in with services. But you are also a wonderful connector to them to find jobs and be able to support themselves. This slide is about sponsorship agreement holders. Now, when the announcement happened on Saturday that Chris Alexander, our current immigration minister, opened up the rules a little bit more, I haven't, quite frankly, changed this slide because I'm going to suggest that people still consider working under sponsorship agreement holders. So in private sponsorship, there are groups of 5, there are community sponsors, and there are sponsorship agreement holders. Groups of 5 and community sponsors used to require a refugee status determination document, and that was something Lifeline Syria pushed to be removed and has been removed as of Saturday. So you can now have a group of 5 permanent residents or citizens who get together and they decide that they will take on the liability of the family, and I'll tell you how much that is soon. And they themselves will submit the case without needing a larger institution to help them submit the case, which is great. And if you can do it, we're happy to help you with the refugee side of the paperwork. We're happy to help you work through how you would do your side and prove that you're able to support. However, there are organizations called sponsorship agreement holders who have legal agreements with the federal government that allow them to submit sponsored cases allow them to submit refugee cases. And they have, because of this legal agreement, you don't have to show as much up front to prove your ability to sponsor, and you don't have the same liable costs. So it's not to say that you don't have to have the money to sponsor, but when you're doing a group of 5, you have to show through a T4 or a bank account or some other means that you and the other 5 people have the funds to support these people. In sponsorship agreement holders, you have to prove that to the sponsorship agreement holder, who might ask for that money in an account, but also might just be okay with you giving pledges. So, and these cases tend to go a lot faster through the central processing in Winnipeg because they're recognized groups that have staff that know how to do paperwork. I used to work for one, so I'm aware of how to do the paperwork in a way that means that it gets through processing. This is not to lock out the groups of 5 or community sponsors, but I would suggest that, you know, there's a lot of religious institutions and ethnic institutions and a few community centers that have these agreements. We have agreements, memorandums of understanding with them that allow us to submit cases. If you're part of a religious group specifically is the one that tends to have a lot of these agreements, I would encourage you to let us know because we might be able to connect you directly back into your sponsorship agreement. So for instance, United Church, Anglican, Lutheran, Mennonite, Unitarian, Presbyterian, I'm probably forgetting a bunch, synagogues, a few mosques. So a lot of those groups have their own agreements and we are in agreement with them on how to work with them. So let us know if you're going to be sponsoring, if you're already connected into that community. If you're not, we'd be happy to connect you to that community. You don't need to find the sponsorship agreement holder. We already have those agreements. So what would your role be as a sponsor? So I've talked about what other people are responsible for, who the refugees are, who the sponsorship agreement holders are. What are you going to be responsible for if you choose to participate in this program? So the first thing that always is the thing that people get worried about, which I will tell you right now is probably not going to be an issue, quite frankly, is financial support. I'll tell you how much that is in a minute, but one of the main things you have to provide is the financial support. These people need something to live on until they can find a job, or in the 12 months until they're able to support themselves later on. They are allowed to go on social assistance after the 12 months, so you can help them for the 12 months, you can help them find jobs, you financially have to support them. You also need to connect them to settlement support, and I'll tell you specifically what settlement agencies do in a minute, but there are a lot of settlement agencies, and I know there are strong ones here in Oakville that can help connect people to different services. But what your biggest strength is going to be is filling in the gaps. So you're giving them some money, they're going to get some services through a settlement support agency, but those are 9 to 5 Monday to Friday staff, and things don't stop outside of those hours. And they also need advocates to help them when they go do things at the settlement agencies or when, I don't know why this happens, trying to get an OHIP card is always a problem. If anyone works for Service Ontario, I want to talk to you afterwards because something goes wrong when you go to get an OHIP card. So you need to go and help these people, be an advocate for them to work through the Canadian system. You also need to help them understand, you know, police in Canada, very different than if you're from another country, where you can usually trust a police officer if you have a problem, or how you go to a walk-in clinic if your child is sick. There's things that seem obvious to us that are not going to be obvious to them, and there are things that you can give them advice on that if they didn't have you, they might struggle more with. I always think about my, this just came up because somebody was asking me about it recently, like why I do the work I do, and I thought about my Ukrainian ancestors when they came to Quebec. My Baba and Guido, my great-grandparents, had my uncle's great uncle and my grandfather, and they were felling trees, and they would go into the woods to fell the trees to clear the area that they were using, and they'd leave the babies on a blanket, and they'd put pitch on them so that the bugs would stay off of them, and they'd say, okay, we hope we see you when you get back, because we've gone into the woods, so don't have a bear eat you. So, you know, there's no support system there. So this is what the strength of private sponsorship is. It's meaning that these people are feeling supported by the community that they're resettling into. So you are their strength. You are their Canadian connector. There was a young woman who was sponsored who came to Canada, and I was talking to her, and she said, you know, I'm trying to get a job. I apply everywhere. I have a little bit of Canadian experience, but I can't seem to get anyone to give me a job. And I said, okay, so walk me through what you do. She said, well, I go into a store, and they say, okay, you can apply online. I said, there's your problem. There's hundreds of people applying online. Go in, shake their hand, leave a resume, Try and make a connection, and I'll be your reference, by the way, because I know that you're a good hard worker, and she got a job in a month. So you can be that Canadian connector that helps them be able to settle, and I'm sure that lots of people in your families and friends had those people that helped them with that initial connection. When you are not responsible, people will say to me, okay, that's great, I get what I'm responsible for, what am I not responsible for? If they go into debt, you are not responsible. If they break the law, you are not responsible. You're not a guarantor of the person. Your rights and the responsibilities, rather, are specifically laid out on the undertaking you sign, and that is all you are responsible for. You are also not responsible for providing them if they have a high medical need with extra costs on medical support. This is sometimes what people would consider a moral requirement, but it is not a legal requirement that you help pay for that. And there's a lot of doctors right now that are setting up services for pro bono work for these people that are, being very activist and helping with these things. So I wouldn't worry about that too much. The refugees do also, well, they're not refugees when they arrive, they're newcomers when they arrive. They do get access to a program called the Interim Federal Health Program, which some of you might have heard of because there's been a few court cases about this. So where it lands right now, and it's still under review, I believe, is that if you are sponsoring government refugees, so refugees that come from the UN, that are in our embassies, interview them, and then you sponsor those refugees, they're called blended visa office referred cases, they get the full complement of interim federal health because they're receiving some dollars from the government potentially. If you are not sponsoring those refugees, so anyone that we name, that we say that's the refugee we want, and we send their paperwork overseas, the children get interim federal health, the parents do not. So I always encourage people to consider fundraising a little bit of extra money on top per adult in case there are things like what tends to happen, quite frankly, is dental. People haven't had access to dental care, and a lot of diets are very rich in sugar, and they don't get the nutrients where they're not eating, vegetables and brushing their teeth every day in a refugee situation necessarily. So those are the things that don't seem so obvious and don't seem so immediate, but it's very difficult if you have a cavity that's very painful for you to learn English because your teeth hurt. So consider that when you're thinking about if you're going to, how much you're going to fundraise. So speaking of fundraise, this is the financial chart. I don't make up these numbers. This is Citizenship and Immigration Canada, and we are going to have a handout, I believe, wherever Olga went. I'm just going to assume that we have a handout. Yes? Handout? Yes. Handout. Lots of, okay, good. We have a handout at the end that you can get so you don't have to scribble all this down. So what I like to look at here is this far column on your right is the total liability. So when I say that you have a responsibility for 12 months, that's the maximum amount you're liable for. But then if we look at that in a realistic way, I, as a single person, can't live on $12,600 for 1 year. I don't know how that would work, but these rates are actually based on social assistance rates. So it's a very, very minimal amount. Is that acceptable? Probably not, but that's all you're required to put up. And I look at that and then the income per month. So you have the startup costs in the one column, which is how much they assume that you need to do to buy things like furniture and pots and pans and food staples and clothing. And then they say the rest of that, which is the 12 months of income support, is divided by 12. So then per month, a single person, according to Citizenship and Immigration Canada, should be able to provide for all of their necessities on $817. I don't think so, but that's all you're liable for. So I would encourage you to really consider, people say, well, then how much should I raise? My best answer to you is I, as a single person, can tell you how much I need to live on, but I don't know how much it costs to raise a family of 4. Go talk to your friends and family who have a family size that you're considering sponsoring and figure out how much realistically you think you should put up. But as a liable cost, again, this is all you are required to put up. Settlement is the next thing. So you have financial, and then you have the settlement requirements. And all these lovely bubbles, some of whom are falling off the screen, I apologize for that, are telling you some of the tasks you might have to do in order to welcome people at the airport. You're going to have to orient them to life in Canada. Arranging temporary accommodations can be a big thing, especially depending on the size of the family. Permanent accommodation is something that obviously is going to be needed. And then there's other things, health cards, dentists, doctors, enrolling children in school. They do qualify for child tax benefits, which can help top up the amount of money that they're living on. And you can decide, if you're planning on giving them a bit more money until the child tax benefits comes in, and then that much will cover off some of the costs. Enrolling them in English classes, other things like that. Where is it? The purplish blue bubble, provide emotional and moral support. So some of the things that are in these bubbles are things that have to be done right away. And things that once you do them, they're done. You enroll a child in school, great. Kids in school, we're fine. Providing emotional and moral support is more long-term and more difficult. And we are working with CCTV, the Center for Victims of Torture and Trauma, or whichever that is, specifically, to try and talk to sponsors about holding sessions about post-traumatic stress disorder, about depression, about other issues. Because I am never going to guarantee you that the refugees who are coming are not going to have mental health problems aside from physical health problems. Because the reality is that they've been in a really horrific situation. They've had to leave their families to flee. Potentially they've lost people on the way. They've been in a refugee camp, which can be very damaging mentally if you're just sort of isolated and you don't know what's going to happen, and maybe you've had friends that have gone on this trip to Europe and they've died on the way. So while people usually do well, and while their kids do well in school, and as soon as they find a job, that's really something that is very good for their mental health, it doesn't mean that people aren't going to need help. You should not be the experts on this. There are trained professionals. If you have people in your groups who are trained professionals, that's great, but you're their friends to provide support and assistance, help them understand how to access these systems, but please never be a counselor. It's not your position. You shouldn't have to take that on. Give them to people, give them resources that will help them with these services. So I would encourage you, as part of a settlement plan and things to start thinking about now, to see what services are available in your area to help with these people. So what does the government do? I've talked a lot about what Lifeline's going to do, what you're supposed to do. How does the government fit into this? Well, we work on all of what I talked about, getting the money ready, getting the support services ready, and then we're going to submit a case. So the group has a form, and a set of forms in the case, and the refugee has a set of forms in the case. Don't worry about trying to figure out these government forms. I warn you now, if you're an insomniac like I am and you need to go to sleep quickly, read government forms. They're really wonderful if you need to go to sleep quickly. But other than that, it's not worth it. We have developed a system to help the refugees complete their forms, which is a lot simpler, and we will help you with the forms that you need to complete. And we have a next step session that we'll be holding if you commit to doing this project, that will explain how to work through the forms, explain some of the parts that you need to fill in. So those are the two parts that are given to the government. They go to central processing in Winnipeg. They're usually processed in about a week for Syrians. Then they get sent overseas to the visa office, and the infrastructure is being revved up based on the announcement on Saturday by Chris Alexander to say that there are more visa offices overseas with more staff and more resources. So we're expecting people might start arriving after that whole process has taken place and the case is overseas, 4 to 6 months, maybe longer in certain parts of the world. So we have seen people arrive in 4 to 6 months. Turkey seems to still be taking longer, maybe a year, but I'm hoping that's going to be reduced. If you sponsor someone in a Gulf country, like Saudi Arabia or EUA or those countries, we're not sure yet specifically. Don't look on the government website about the times. People will say to me, but on the government website it says, X number of months. That's for all cases being processed out of that post. Syrians are being put at the top of the pile. So we can tell you anecdotally how much we think it will take. We'll start to see more results where we can give you a better idea as people start arriving. So they will be, the case will go overseas, they'll go through their interview, most likely get interviewed, they'll be told they're accepted, the clearance will be done, that's the medical, criminality, and security screenings, and then the International Organization for Migration arranges arrival. You don't help book their tickets, you don't help arrange their exit visas or anything like that. There's an agency overseas that does this. But there's a catch. This is, by the way, my bad Canadian joke. So we love people to feel very Canadian on arrival. We give them debt. They get a loan for their travel that they have to repay. So the medical costs, the screening, and the flight, and any exit permits that they have to pay for, that cost is covered, that the government gives them a loan, which is organized by the International Organization for Migration, and when they arrive, they have to start repaying it. Depending on the size of the loan, and it's usually somewhere from a couple $1,000s per person in the family, they will get a time that is interest-free, and you can help them defer the loan if that's something that's helpful for them, so that they're not panicking about trying to repay the loan right away. But they will get a collections notice within a couple of months of arrival, which is very worrying for a lot of people who have, especially if they've never had debt before. So this is something that you don't have to help them repay. Some groups choose to help repay. Some groups will say, we put this much money aside, and at the end of the sponsorship, we didn't use it all, so we're going to give it to them to repay the loan. But I'm putting it out there, not your responsibility, but something you should be aware of. So the settlement agencies, of which there are many strong ones, I understand, in Oakville, they're mainly funded to provide these services. Language employment, completing government documents, which are usually the SIN forms, the OHIP forms, child tax benefit forms. Some of them will go and be interpreters when the refugees or newcomers take those forms to the correct agency. Some don't have capacity to do that, so you might have to help them with that. But the language employment are the two strong ones, and then they do other services. For instance, I know of conversation circles that take place in a lot of the agencies in Toronto. So as opposed to the formal language training, there's also a time when you sit and you just discuss things, and you learn how to use the language in a different way. A lot of them have programming for women and youth, because these are two areas that they want to focus on. So the women sometimes get together and they make a meal, and everyone gets to take some of it home, and there's childcare, and the kids get to do activities. A lot of the youth get support services where they can talk about it, because some of the hardest settlement is for people who are about 19 to almost 30. Because sometimes they're too old to go into high school, but they're sort of too young to be in the language training with their parents, and that's kind of like, I don't want to sit in a classroom with my parents and learn English. Like, I want my own program. So those are the ones that I really encourage you to have somebody, if you can, who's youth, that's part of your group. Because it's really good if they can be connected in, if they're not able to go to high school, then they need to be connected in some way to a youth program or someone who's youth in the area. So that's an area I would encourage you to consider, but the settlement agencies also have programming. So, you've probably heard me talk enough by now. What are you doing next? What are the next steps? I didn't delete this slide, so this is actually my next step slide. There we go. Next steps is to assess what you have and what you need. So I'm sure that you have been thinking about this, you've been planning for this, you thought, okay, we're going to come here, we'll learn about it, and we got to go, what are we going to do next? Do you have enough people? We suggest no less than 5, no more than 10 as your core group of people that will take on the case. I say no more than 10 because really I find it gets unwieldy if you have too many people trying to make decisions for the family. It doesn't mean that people can't come in for certain specific tasks. Like one of my groups one time said, we just need someone to get them curtains for their kitchen. I thought, okay, well, there's a very specific task. But the people who are going to be mainly responsible need to be probably no less than 5, shouldn't be any more than 10. And you should have people in this core group that can commit to at least somebody or 2 people for daytime, at least somebody for the evenings, somebody for the weekends, and preferably somebody or somebodies for emergencies, because emergencies are emergencies. You can't plan for them. And it tends to happen very quickly. I've had a lot of people who need to go to a clinic when they arrive because the water's different or the food's different, and it's, like when we go to another country and you're trying to figure out where do you go if your stomach is not particularly happy. So figure out how many people you have and how many people you need, and are they willing to make a commitment to this? You might not have arrivals right away. It could happen in a couple months. It might take 6 months or a year. We're really hoping it doesn't. But people need to be ready to make that commitment and for the commitment of the year when the family arrives. And you need to figure out how you're going to fundraise. So we don't need money in a bank account now, and there's this wonderful fund that was Jeff spoke of earlier that you can talk to them about how your money can maybe be put in that fund for fundraising, or if you have a group that you need to get a tax receipt, if that's what you want, a tax receipt, you could talk to groups you're connected with who might be able to give out tax receipts for your fundraising. But we don't need you to have it in the bank. We just need to know how you're going to get the money. So get as much together as you can. Tell us how you're going to make the commitment to the rest, and then we will consider you ready. So once you've figured out the people and the funds, that's your group. Your group has been formed, and you want to contact us. It's not Take Action anymore. Actually, I changed that it's Take Action. It's not group. It's the group form. So it's take the group form step is under Take Action and group form on our website. Sorry, end of the day. So on our website, there's a tab that says Take Action. There's a group form. You fill out the group form. As soon as you fill out that form, we'll invite you to a next step session where we'll get into the very, very specific liability that you're taking on. We'll help you with your settlement plan, what you need to do to do the settlement planning. If you want to start thinking about that, you can go on the government website and look up the sponsorship agreement holders settlement plan or group of 5 settlement plan. It's the same. They're 2 different forms. Or the undertaking 5373, I believe it's the number. And you can start thinking about how your group's going to put all this information together. So 3 last thoughts. We are already connected to the sponsorship agreement holders, so if you don't have an existing connection, you don't need to go out and talk to the groups that have agreements, because a lot of them are so busy right now they might not be able to answer you. So let us worry about, if you want to work under a SAW, connecting you to a SAW. If you don't have a refugee family or person that you want to sponsor, we have people who need to be sponsored. But if you do have somebody in mind that you would like to sponsor, we are going to be holding another session here on Monday, I believe, 28th. Yes, Monday. I'm getting some head nods. We switched the date. So if you have someone you want to sponsor, I would encourage you to come back on Monday and hear the presentation that's specific to who needs to be sponsored, and you'll get next steps on how to bring those cases forward. And don't worry about completing any government forms yourself. We will help you with that because they are quite complicated. So with that, I will say thank you for listening. And